Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to another episode of our Arkansas Alumni Association's Lunch and Learn series. We're super glad that you're here with us today. My name is Mary Kate Harrison, and I am the Executive Projects Coordinator here at the Arkansas Alumni Association. We're really excited for today's Lunch and Learn hosts. We have the new Dean of the University of Arkansas College of Education and Health Professions, Dean Brian Primack, who will be joined today by one of our Arkansas Alumni Association National Board of Directors members, Tori Bogner. So before we begin, I'd like to ask everyone to please go ahead and mute themselves and keep yourself muted throughout the presentation so that we can all hear Dean Primack and Tori as best as possible during their presentation. If you have some questions that you think of during the presentation, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end when we do some question and answer. So it's my privilege to introduce Ms. Tori Bogner, who, as I mentioned earlier, is one of our Arkansas Alumni Association's National Board of Directors members. She is the Vice President of Marketing for Signature Bank of Arkansas, where she oversees marketing and advertising, public relations, and community engagement efforts on the bank's behalf. Tori is an active member of the Junior League of Northwest Arkansas, Zeta Tau Alpha Alumni, and the National Board of Directors for the Arkansas Alumni Association. She volunteers with the Children's Safety Center as part of the Development Committee, holds a member services advisor role in the Junior League of Northwest Arkansas, and was integral to the Next T2, a new young patrons program at Theater Squared. Tori was born and raised on her family's rice farm in Poinsett County and graduated valedictorian of her class of 26 from the now consolidated Wiener High School. She received her bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Arkansas, where she also served as student body president. She has completed Leadership Fayetteville, Leadership Benton County, and Leadership Arkansas, and has been recognized in the 2017 class of 20 in their 20s by Arkansas Business, the 2019 Fast 15 class by the Northwest Arkansas Business Journal, and the 2020 inaugural Future 50 class by Arkansas Money and Politics. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Tori.
I didn't know you were going to read all that. You could have stopped a long time ago. I'm not that interesting. We're here to meet the dean, but on behalf of the board of directors, I just wanted to go ahead and say thank you to everyone for being here today, cutting out an hour of time to spend with us. It's more important than ever to stay connected in these crazy days. And so we're really glad that this has opened an opportunity for us to be able to gather from all across the country, and that we can not have to worry about not being in the right city to get to hear from someone we're all interested in hearing about. So I got the distinct privilege of getting to chat with the dean yesterday, and I'm just very excited that he's here. I'm very grateful that you're all here to spend some time with him. I'm going to turn it over to him to introduce himself, because he tells it better than I can. But like Mary Kate said, if you've got questions throughout, you can message them to me, to the chat as a whole, or to Mary Kate, and we'll field those at the end. Dean Primack.
Great. Thank you so much, Tori. And thank you to everybody who made this possible. Brandy, Mary Kate, it's been a very smooth, pleasant process. Tori, I also really enjoyed our first meeting and look forward to having more of a relationship as time goes on. I'm also really excited to see the guest list here today and to see that we've got alumni, but we've also got faculty and staff and students representing our college, representing other colleges. And that is one of the big things that I would like to do, is to create more community just like this, more opportunities to interact. And, obviously this time of COVID has been very, very difficult, but one theme that our administration has been looking to is, what are the silver linings? And one of the silver linings is that, more people are participating today probably than may have otherwise, or, we're getting a better mix or something like that. So those are the things I think we really need to reach for in these challenging times. So you asked me to sort of introduce myself. For those folks who've looked at my bio, it does probably look like a bit of a circuitous path, would be maybe the kindest way to talk about it. But there is a bit of a method to the madness. So I'll just very briefly say that in college, I studied English and mathematics. obviously I didn't have too much of a direct career path out of that. But during the summers, I found that I really loved teaching. I taught at a large residential summer school of 1,500 students. It was students that weren't necessarily the top students, but needed a little bit more creativity. So for example, I taught a course in breaking and making codes, but that was really a math course. It was really about math and linguistics, but we did it in the guise of, oh, we're learning codes. I taught a course on African culture, but it was all through art. So they all felt like they were doing art, but they were also learning a lot about African culture at the time. I also taught a course on math and art in a similar kind of way. So given that, when I graduated, my first job out of college was I went to West Africa to teach at a very, very small international school, and I taught math and phys ed there. I had some links to Africa because I actually grew up in East Africa until I was about 6 years old. My dad was in the public health service. And so, you know, I wasn't a stranger to some of the, you know, potential challenges that I would have had. And I actually really enjoyed it in terms of seeing the world and having that first experience being a real teacher. I came back to the United States and I got my first master's in education with a focus, though, on human development and psychology. I was really interested in, you know, teaching better, being more innovative and creative in teaching, and starting to deal with kids that had more challenges and how to rise to those challenges. I continued to teach. I slowly worked my way to becoming the dean of students of that summer program of 1,500 kids. And there I became even more interested in kids that had difficulties, whether those were emotional, physical. And so that is what led me to medical school. And I went to Emory and I studied family practice that sort of linked as much of, you know, the health education aspects and interest in kids and interest in, you know, disability and mental health. And I did practice 18 years. So this was not a little, you know, sort of part of my experience. But during those 18 years, I started doing more and more research that combined on the faculty of the University of Pittsburgh that combined my interest in health with my interest in education. So all of my research is about innovative prevention through research and education, mental health and substance use, since these are things that we need a lot more education about. I also noticed during my time spending a lot of time around junior high and high school aged students, who were the folks that I was teaching for the most part, just how getting hooked into devices they were, you know, and not a lot of people were doing research on social media at the time. It was kind of just developing. And so I was very interested, you know, what are the potential positives for people's health and wellness, but what are the potential negatives as well? And then finally, during that whole time, I started getting more into administration also. I developed and directed a multidisciplinary center that, you know, involved health and communication and education. I became the assistant vice chancellor across the health sciences at Pitt. So that included public health as well as medicine, nursing, dental, pharmacy, etc. And then I became the dean of the honors college at the University of Pittsburgh. And I really thought I was done. This was just a great job and I loved it. And then I heard about this deanship and this college, this very unique college in Arkansas that really combines education and health in such a unique and interesting way in such a fabulous setting. And the rest is history. You know, the more I discovered about it, the more I liked it. And fortunately, here I am today, about a year after starting.
Well, we are very glad that your path brought you here. And it seems like you're settling in well, because the world is so tiny. As we were getting to know each other a little bit, he asked me what my connection was to Theater Squared, which is one of my passions here in Northwest Arkansas. And it turns out his daughter is scheduled due to be one of the actresses in the production of Matilda when it happens. So Small world, he also gets his tropical smoothie fix about 3 windows down from my office. So tell us a little bit more about settling in this first year.
Yeah, well, we have definitely settled in, and you can tell from those couple of examples. So yeah, Sadie has already been in a couple shows at theaters, at Arts Live Theater, which is a community theater, and she has done some acting in the past. She's 13. And sort of on a whim, she decided, Matilda's one of my favorite shows, and I'd really like to audition for it. And she did really well. They have a professional Matilda coming in from New York City, but she got the part of Matilda's best friend, whose name is Lavender, and she had to do the original audition and then 4 initial callbacks, including, they called her in the evening and said, you memorize this monologue and do it for us tomorrow morning. And so there was a lot of, anxiety associated with that, but it was something that she really loved. And unfortunately, they weren't able to go up in April like they were planning on it, but it is still scheduled for next April or May. So fingers crossed that the world is in a different place by that point. She's also really dug into school and got a great group of friends. I also have a son, Micah, and he also has really dug in. He's 16 and he goes to Fayetteville High School. And there he started their improv comedy club and had a great group of people. Unfortunately, when COVID hit, they had to, sort of take a pause, but hopefully that will get back again soon. He's also started a band. Music is one of his things, and it's sort of a folk, country, bluegrass, rock, kind of amalgamation. And both of them have made, good friends from various different backgrounds. I think a more diverse group of friends here than we had in Pittsburgh, where we were for the past 20 years, which of course the people in Pittsburgh said, what are you doing, going there? But, they just don't realize what we have here in Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas and the rest of the state. So yes, we play music every day. You mentioned the tropical smoothie fix. That usually comes after biking the trails around Lake Fayetteville. And so that was another thing. We had never even, considered ourselves, ever to get on a mountain bike. But of course, coming to mountain bike nirvana, we decided to embrace that. And now we love it. And we've got a whole list of different trails that we go to in the evenings and on weekends when we can. And tropical smoothie on the way home is a good, it's a good incentive.
Well, great. So how about from the college side? Settled in well for your personal life? We want to know about the college now.
Yes, absolutely. Well, all of that, positivity that we experienced when we got here, having been nervous, understandably, you've been in, somewhere, anywhere for 20 years where you really dug in. I mean, we had so many social connections and, we were so encouraged by the friendliness and by the nature, as I've talked about. And this really has very much carried over to the job. And I'm not just saying this because some of my faculty and staff and administrators are on the call right now, because they know, my authentic and, genuine enthusiasm at, being here. And there is so much excitement and help from all sides in strengthening what is already a very remarkable college into something, even more exciting. So I think that most folks here know at least something about the college, but just in case, I'll just give a very, very brief overview. That we have, educational elements and health-related elements. The educational, very briefly, we do everything full service K through 12. So, you want to get a credential, to actually be licensed to teach, whether it's secondary or, primary school, if you want to be a researcher, if you want to be an educational specialist, like an educational tech specialist or something like that. We also have a whole area that is focused on education policy. We have a whole area that focuses on adult education. So if that's community college, higher education, adult and lifelong learning, workforce development, we've got a really robust education side. The health side, there's a big emphasis on sports. You can imagine we're a sports, town and a sports, university. And so there is sports science from kinesiology, understanding muscles and, working out and stuff like that better, to sports management and athletic training. We've got, of course, a whole nursing school with 1,600 students. We've got a whole public health infrastructure that is trying to understand things like the coronavirus and how it's spreading and how we can prevent and things like that. And then, of course, professions related to health, like, counseling, mental health counseling, rehabilitation counseling, occupational therapy, speech therapy. So all of these things come under the auspices of our college, which is why it's so big. 500 faculty and staff, 5,300 students, which breaks down to about 4,000 undergrad and 1,300 graduate students. And so the thing, that was anxiety provoking about that is just how large it was. I mean, as Dean of the Honors College, I had 2,000 people. So this was much larger. But I'll tell you that my day is more relaxed here because I've got such a good team. Because everybody is really on the same plan with wanting to create this strategic plan that we've been working on, wanting to find better ways to educate students, to get a more diverse group of students, to find innovations there, to do better research that makes more of a difference to people. And one of the biggest things that I think we're doing is more community outreach and engagement to other parts of the state. We do not want to lose the Tories of the world, right? I'm sure that she had her chance to go to Vanderbilt or, University of Texas or, and we want to keep finding them. And so the only way I think we can do that is to really have a great presence in all the different parts of the state. And it's also going to be a win-win because it's going to be really useful to our students to, learn about different kinds of conditions. We do want them to learn, how to teach and how to, give healthcare here in Northwest Arkansas, where we have a diverse community, but we also want to reach out to other parts of the state. So we've got some, interesting ideas there. And I think people are just very, very much on board, whether it's the faculty and the staff, the students are enthusiastic, and certainly alumni are. And then, the last thing that I'll mention that we've been working on that I think we're all pretty excited about is having these different areas of the college work together. When I described them, I kind of talked about the education side and the health side, but ultimately what we really want is all of these different areas to sort of interact with each other in a synergistic way. A lot of other places, at Pitt, for example, where I just came from, the areas covered in our college are separated into 5 different colleges. There is a totally separate College of Education, a separate College of Public Health, a separate College of Nursing, a separate College of Rehab, et cetera, et cetera. And that leads to a lot of divisiveness and a lot of silos and territoriality. Whereas really, I think the way that we're going to best attack a lot of the biggest problems facing our fields today is by combining our efforts. Just as an example, if we want to look at an issue like disability, which is whether it's physical disability or emotional disability, is such a challenge. We are really going to be able to make a unique contribution because we've got folks in education that are thinking about special ed. We've got folks in occupational therapy that are thinking about how to organize someone's environment to make dealing with that disability easier. We're going to have counselors understanding the emotional toll, not just on that individual, but the family. We've got policy experts who are looking at disability law and policy so therefore we can marshal all these resources together to attack a problem that a lot of other places, with top schools in these areas just are not going to be able to do. So we really want to leverage that uniqueness. And in all of these areas, this past year has really been exciting in that we've moved ahead, whether it's teaching, research, community engagement, synergizing, all those things are moving in a positive direction, even given this new wrench that has been put in the whole system named COVID.
I just have to interject and say, you know, when you're sending your students across the state, if you send them to East Arkansas in the summer, make sure you send them with a big can of off, because the mosquitoes are as big as bats over there. Well, speaking of COVID, let's answer the burning question off the bat. With almost 6,000 students, staff, and faculty under your purview, what is your plan to help everyone get through the fall semester safely and successfully?
Yeah. Well, the university is doing a ton. So we are part of that process. But again, it's just been a very heartening last couple of months in what could have been a very disheartening environment. I mean, we're seeing some very difficult numbers and some very challenging news, but people really have been coming together, and the university really does have very, very good, flexible plans to make sure that people stay safe. So one example is everything has been completely flexible in terms of preferences, whether it's on the faculty side or whether it's on the student side. So what I mean by that is every single one of our faculty members was given the choice. Would you like to try to have your course be some kind of a hybrid where maybe you're doing some in person, with safety measures, and you're doing some remote, or maybe you want to try to have it be completely in person, or maybe you want it to be completely remote because, you're concerned with your particular class and you feel like you can deliver that information well in a remote setting. And so therefore all of the faculty, get their druthers. We're not sending anybody with a pre-existing condition or a challenge or whatever into a situation that they're not comfortable with because they got to choose. The way it turned out, we have about 700 courses in the fall, and about 200 of those courses, the faculty member has said specifically, I would like that to have at least some in-person component. And so we're doubling down on that, those 200 courses, and we're making absolutely sure in every possible way. I mean, we're, changing all of the water fountains so that they're touchless. We are, going to be having, sanitizer everywhere. Masks are going to be required. We're following all of the university's guidelines, but then we also have the benefit of having the public health infrastructure in our college. So we've got a lot of public health experts that we've been able to talk to help us, understand how best to do messaging, how best to, get people to really comply with things, because this is the kind of thing that they study. They've studied, other contagious viruses like Ebola and things like that. And so, we're very fortunate to have those kinds of additional resources, as we think about these challenges. I mentioned that the flexibility was also on the part of the students, and how we're doing that is, let's say a faculty member has said, I want part of my course to be in person. Well, we are saying that's great, but we also this summer have been adding a system called Echo 360, a digital system that is going to record every single class. And so if a student in one of those classes would like the flexibility of taking that course remotely, even though it has in-person components, they can. And so in this way, we really are able to sort of double down on both. We're able to say, if you're going to be in person, you're going to be comfortable. We're going to do everything we can to make that a safe environment. But we're also going to embrace the fact that we have so much remote learning right now. But again, this is an area where we have expertise because we've got a whole area called educational technology. We've got a whole group of people who study educational pedagogy and who've been studying for years. How can we make remote learning not only okay and almost as good, but even better in some ways? And so what we've been doing there, for example, is we've actually this summer, we've tapped a group of 6 people who we're calling remote learning gurus. And they have been hired to take extra time and to create, very special plans that are sometimes very individualized for each faculty member to take whatever they're doing remotely and to take it to the next level. So we're not, only focusing on, so we really are doing both. We're saying we're going to make it safe, but we're also going to make it very effective.
Excellent. I can imagine how in 10 years, some of these students will look back and be able to apply this real world scenario and be able to say, I was a student in public health during COVID.
Yeah. And we really are we really are doing exactly that. So for example, all of our nursing students are going through a training on contact tracing through the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. So we didn't just sit back and say this summer, oh gosh, we've just got to survive. We said, what are the areas where we can really take an idea and go to the next step? Our nursing students are also going to be running screening stations. If you've gone to a doctor's office, you've seen that they screen you on the way in with some questions. So they're really learning on the job. It's the same thing, with educational technology. The students that are doing stuff like with that, they've got a ton of stuff to think about. Our public health students also, have got a real opportunity to start thinking about and studying what's the best way to message, how to encourage masks and things like that in an environment where that's not necessarily so easy.
Well, we do have about 30 minutes left, so I want to be sure everyone has plenty of time to hear what I could listen to for hours. So tell us more about your research and how it has such an interesting tie to what's happening in the world today.
Sure. Well, why don't I go ahead and share my screen? Because I did prepare a few slides related to this. And okay, so social media, friend or foe. You probably have heard of social media, but how old is it? When did social media start? The thing that I find fascinating is it started less than 20 years ago. There literally was not even a word for social media 20 years ago. And today, social media is everywhere. Okay, even when kids are hanging out together, they're usually all on their own social media. And so what we end up with is these bizarre statistics that you hear of. Things like, 4 hours a day on average, people use social media. So, and it only started 20 years ago. So what we have is probably the fastest growing technology ever. Even more than things like television, things like the personal computer, which had a much more slow rise. We have this immediate change. At the same time, as I mentioned, because I was around kids in my educational career and as Dean of Students of this summer program, I started realizing that mental health was becoming very, very problematic very, very quickly and seemed to be paralleling a little bit this rise in social media use and other technology use. A lot of people don't realize this, but depression is now actually worldwide the #1 cause of disability. You might be thinking to yourself, what? It's more of a cause of disability being depressed than having back pain or having had surgery or having, diabetes or heart problems. And the answer, sadly, is yes. So this is not just a United States thing. A lot of people probably have heard of this, but if you haven't, it's not your fault. It's just that it's very, very under the radar to a lot of public health people. But here you see the New York Times reporting that US suicide rates are at a 30-year high. And this is despite the fact that we're doing all of these things to try to prevent suicide that have, or were for a while, been quite successful. So the question becomes, what about social media? And because, again, as a teacher, as an administrator, I was looking and seeing kids directly and seeing, gosh, they're getting depressed, but they're also using a lot of these new technologies, and they're on their phones constantly, and there's social media. But I wanted to look at this scientifically. I didn't want to just say, geez, they're probably connected. And so you need to think very carefully and say, well, maybe social media is linked to a lot of positives. I mean, maybe it's just a coincidence that these two things are going up together. And maybe social media encouraging it is actually a really good way for somebody who might have been depressed to link to other people to get positive reinforcement. Now, on the other hand, there's no shortage of social media and other types of media showing us lots of, very scary news. And then there's articles that talk about what constant exposure to negative news is doing to our mental health. Interestingly, seeing a lot of very positive media can also give you mental health problems. Because if you look at something like this and you say, oh, get lean and fit in just 8 days, flat belly foods. And then I, start to, pump iron, right, in my garage for 8 days, and I look exactly the same. And I still can't not only win a 5K, but I can barely get past the first K, right? Then all of a sudden I'm like, there's something wrong with me. Everything on here, get rock hard abs, build wealth and power. All you have to do is buy my magazine for $5.99 and you're going to get wealth and power. This is a clear setup for, being disappointed in yourself. And there also are related ideas in what people have called the COVID-19 infodemic. So, whether it's a magazine, whether it's, as we're going to see, on Facebook, or whether it's in the news, the information that we are exposed to can be directly related to our mental health. We might be, scared of all the things we see. We might feel like we don't measure up to the things we see. And we might get information that either isn't accurate or that scares us just so that it brings us back tomorrow. And so a lot of people have been saying, yes, the virus is causing a lot of damage, and we need to be very much on top of that. And we need to have very good information about, how to use masks and why to use masks and what else we can do to protect ourselves. But we also don't need to be so terrified that we are just, that we're on a new antidepressant, every week, which has been happening during this infodemic that has paralleled the epidemic. I mentioned that we would also talk about Facebook. So there has been, for about the past decade, an entity that has been called Facebook depression, which is related to this, right? You see images that are unattainable, and you feel like, gosh, I feel bad about myself because I'm not able to, do it like The Rock does it. But the truth is that we know from health behavior theory that I don't necessarily compare myself to The Rock, right? Because we are different in a lot of ways. He's a movie star, okay? I'm just not, I'm a 51-year-old, bald guy, And so the bottom line is, now who I do compare myself to is my colleagues, my friends, right? On social media networks like Facebook. But what we don't realize is that these kinds of profiles are curated in a lot of ways just as much as this. I am, as I go through my Facebook feed, my Instagram feed, I am seeing the one picture that those folks took out of 200. I'm seeing the one moment that they are the absolute happiest. But I'm probably looking at this and saying, gosh, they're on their honeymoon, or, I'm not on vacation. You know, I'm around, my house is a mess, you know, because all of our houses are a mess, right? You know, that's real life. But we don't see that, you know, when we look at social media all day. So what social media has done is it's taken this idea of social comparison, which we've always had. We've always had social comparison. Wow, that person has a more expensive car. That person's better looking. But it brings it to a new level because people are able to very, very carefully curate exactly what goes up on their page. But you know, experiencing that are not able to really think of that. So the bottom line is that we really don't know whether this kind of culture, you know, is maybe helping some of our mental health issues, or whether it's problematic, whether it's taking us away from maybe what would have been more meaningful or more real social experiences. So that's why we started doing research like this, where we did the first nationally representative study to look at over 2,000 people in a representative way and to say, look, on this axis here, I've got the likelihood of being depressed. On this axis here, I've got the quartile of how much social media you use. So the people in this group here use the most social media, which in this study was more than about, that was conducted about 5 years ago now, was about more than 2 hours a day. These people used like nothing or like 30 minutes a day. And then these people here used sort of in the middle. And what we expected was, well, you know what, if you use nothing, then, you know, maybe you're actually more likely to be depressed because, you know, you're not getting the benefit of all that social connection. But if you use like sort of a little bit, you know, maybe you're actually less likely to be depressed. You know, it's kind of down here. And then if you use a lot and that's all you do with your life, well, maybe it goes up a little bit more. So we kind of, you know, expected this sort of like J-shaped curve. Well, this is what we found. We found a straight line showing that the people who use the most social media are about 3 times as likely to be depressed as the people who use, you know, just a little bit or none. We then did this same study. Now, you know, one thing that's really important that, you know, social science researchers who are doing this kind of thing need to figure out is, well, what's the chicken and what's the egg, right? Because it could be that these people here, right, they're using a lot of social media and then they become depressed. But it could also be that these people were already depressed and so they don't feel like going out and so they just sit around on social media all day. And either one of those directions would make a lot of sense. Well, that's why we did this exact same study, but we did it longitudinally. We did it over time. We started with people who were non-depressed, and we said, are the people who use more social media more likely to become depressed? And the answer is we found exactly the same line. But when we did the study the other direction, we said, do depressed people start to use more social media? The answer was, it was completely flat. And what that means is not only does this research start to show us that we've got this really dramatic relationship, but it really does seem to go in one direction and not the other. Obviously, there's more research to do, but this is a pretty powerful basic idea. We looked at this with other kinds of outcomes, like perceived emotional support. What about how much social media you use and how emotionally supported you feel? Well, again, we found that the more social media that you use, you actually feel less emotionally supported. You wouldn't necessarily expect that. Why is this? Well, it may be that you're seeing a lot of those images and you're kind of feeling like everybody else has more support, but in comparison, I don't have as much. You also may be missing out on a lot of the emotional natural social things that you would be engaged with otherwise. What about eating disorders? We published this study that shows that, again, the people who use the most social media are like 3 times as likely to develop eating disorders. Makes sense, because we know that people, do not post pictures of themselves where they look overweight, as an example. And people that are overweight don't post as many pictures of themselves. So you're seeing a very, very skewed sample of the world, and you're feeling worse and worse about yourself, even though you might be actually quite normal if you look at, the statistics for the United States as a whole. And then this is the study where I think the bank really broke open, because here we were looking at the outcome of perceived social isolation. So here again, we're looking at how much social media you use. Same as before, more social media here, less social media here. But our outcome was, how socially isolated do you feel? And this is what we found. The people who use the most social media, not only do they feel more depressed, do they feel more anxious, do they have more eating disorders, they also actually feel more isolated. Even though you've got 700 friends, that doesn't necessarily translate to really feeling like you've got 700 friends. In fact, the people with no friends were the people who were the ones who were the best off. So all of this stuff was reported in all of these different areas. And I was very proud to have, this not only on Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley and NPR, but also Cosmo, right? When you've hit Cosmo and Men's Health, you're on to something, especially if you're also in US News and World Report. And I think the reason for that is that these kinds of results, they just demonstrate to us that there is this societal thing going on where we're all just a little bit duped. Even in the word social media, we've got that word social. But what this study is saying is it doesn't really translate into social when it comes down to a deeper level of the meaning of that word. I'm just going to talk about one other quick thing, and then I want to hear your questions. So you may be saying at this point, yeah, but you know what? Like, you're talking about this Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, just how much social media you use, but you can use different kinds of social media in different ways, right? One person, if 2 people both use 2 hours of social media a day, one person might be just clicking pictures of babies and puppies the whole time, and saying like. And then someone else might be fighting about, politics and religion and all kinds of other really, intense things, right? And these people are probably going to have different experiences, right? Yes. And the study we published on this, I think, is very, very interesting and gives us some ideas for the future. What we found is, you see this square, this is going to be positive. So, and then over here is the risk of depression. And what you can see is that we found that when people have positive experiences, they actually have less of a risk of depression. When people, though, have negative experiences, the triangle, they have more of a risk for the depression. So what this sort of means is, if we could make social media 100% a positive experience, we might actually lower depression. The problem is 2 things. One is, look at the difference between these numbers. This one is like 3 times the magnitude of this one. And we controlled in such a way that what this means is that whenever you have a negative experience, your risk for depression goes up by 15%, whereas if you have a positive experience, it goes down by 5%. So what this means is that the negative stuff can be more powerful than the positive stuff. And we see this in sociology and psychology all the time. It's called negativity bias. You have 4 classes that you're taking and you get 3 A's and a C. Which is the one that you're thinking about the most, right? You're thinking about that C, right? So we see this in other ways. The bottom line is that it holds when it comes to social media. The other problem is that it's not really possible to have only these experiences and not these experiences, because these experiences are like, oh gosh, I'm jealous of something that somebody else posted, which is going to happen basically every time you go on. It's going to be, I posted this really cute picture of my puppy and I only got 34 likes, but this guy's puppy got 72 likes. And that's an uglier puppy than my puppy, And so these things are going to happen. So this is one reason why there is some hope, but we've got to also deal with some realities. So the question is, can we achieve a healthy balance? Should we avoid social media altogether? Well, I don't think it's feasible, right? We're talking about something that's used 4 hours a day most of the time, sometimes 10 hours a day. Right? It's also part of our lives. It's how we get our information. We have Facebook page for the college. We have a Twitter account for the college. I mean, we desperately need these things, and social media can be positive. And especially given realities like COVID, we need to embrace it as much as possible. But our goal should be, therefore, not to say, oh, get rid of it, don't ever use it, but how can we understand the nuances to help us use it as much as possible for positive? The very last thing I'll tell you is it's a little bit like the food pyramid, or now it's choosemyplate.gov. When we found that lots of different foods were making people sick, trans fats are bad for this reason, and, saturated fats are bad for this reason, et cetera, we didn't tell people to stop eating. We said, okay, we've got to balance things in a particular way. Okay, we got to have some reason to it. And that is, I think, what we ultimately need to do with social media. So thank you very much. I am glad to take questions here. And then if we don't have time, then I'll stay here as long as I can. But if we don't have time, here is my email so that folks can ask me stuff offline as well.
Well, we do have a few that have come in. First off was a question about the college. No, it's early, but with K-12 plus higher education within the college, are there any new efforts to equip future educators to teach in this new virtual or hybrid educational world?
Yes. Okay. Great question. So I'll repeat. Question is, we have a lot of connections with superintendents, with schools across the state. Most of them are, in this area, but, what are we going to do specifically to try to help those folks with their, digital and remote learning? And the answer is that we have a lot of things that are going on in terms of, we've got students, for example, who are embedded in schools and are trying out specific curricula or ideas that they have. However, we are not really making any big changes on a high level, because most of those things have already been decided, right? The school systems, we did offer our help. I contacted Jay Dostal and, other folks in the Fayetteville and, Bentonville, and said, how can we help? And they generally said, we've got our system. We're just honing it a little. We've basically already been, we've already been using this system for years. And so what we're doing is we are participating in that, mostly so our students can understand and they can do their own research and they can do their own, mini ways of trying to better understand this new environment and maximize it. But in terms of really, helping somebody create a whole new system, that was generally already done, so it really wasn't necessary.
Okay. What are your thoughts on influencer culture?
Yeah, so influencers like on YouTube and that type of thing?
YouTube, Instagram.
Yeah.
Instagram.
Yeah. Well, so we've always had influencer culture. In other words, long before there was social media, music stars and sports figures were influencing in other ways. What is changed? And so, you could say, oh my gosh, influencers are so influential when it comes to young people, but we've always had that in a way. However, I do think that the current influencer culture that we have is even more dramatic. One reason for that is that it is so, there's so much direct, there's so much direct connection. In other words, you might be a big fan of, your favorite pop star, Rihanna or something like that. But the thing is, you would really only be experiencing that from afar. You certainly might be influenced if she is in a magazine advertising, a particular brand of shoe, and you might be more likely to purchase that shoe. If she says something in one of her songs, you might be more likely to have your normative beliefs change about what kind of behaviors you should have yourself. The thing that's different is now those influencers are with you 24/7. See, Rihanna was not with you 24/7. You were only experiencing her, when you saw that, heard that song, or when you, saw that magazine ad. Well, now you can basically in your pocket 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you actually are interrupted, in the middle of while you're trying to study for a test with a beep that specifically says to you, my favorite influencer just posted something. So not only are they just sort of more, present, they're present, and they also kind of intrude upon everything else that you're doing. The other thing that's related to that is one thing that a lot of influencers do. I mean, some influencers are sort of unattainable, kind of like The Rock that I was showing before. But some influencers are very much like you, I'm about your age. And so then all of a sudden, we know again from health behavior theory and educational theory that if you're getting a message from someone that's more like you, that message can be more powerful. This is why, for example, we do things like we try to do a lot of train the trainers things in education where, instead of an old guy in a suit teaching, we try to, to get college students to be, who the high school students look up to be passing messages along, whether those are health related, whether those are educational. That's the kind of power that influencer culture also has. So I would say that, it's the same kind of influential stuff that we've seen in the past, but it's more powerful because it's ever present and because you can really relate to those people in a lot of ways.
So I had two questions come in that were very similar. So I'm going to try to combine them a bit. What strategies do you use to teach your own children about having a healthy relationship with social media? And how do you frame discussions on social media balance with teenagers, especially considering that they're the highest user population?
Yeah. Well, it's extremely difficult is the first thing to say about that second thing. I mean, it's also extremely difficult being a parent. So the answer to both of those is it's extremely difficult. And I think that it's important that people kind of come at it from that perspective at the beginning so that they don't feel like a failure when they try something and it doesn't work. Whether that's as a parent or whether that's as someone who's a leader of young people, as a principal, as a teacher, as a public health person, as a physician, as a nurse, et cetera, et cetera. It's just very, very difficult to, get our, messages across. Let me go to the first question, the first part of the question first. So with my kids, I very much embraced the idea of program or be programmed. In other words, I think that a lot of the reason why people are overly influenced by social media, traditional media, is that they're not thinking critically about it. They are just letting it wash over them. And it's been shown, for example, that around 85% of advertising works on a subliminal level. You don't even really remember being exposed to that ad, but it kind of went into your subconscious because of connections in our brain between our visual cortex and our emotional parts of the body. And so all of a sudden, we are now kind of under an influence. But if we are critical thinkers, if we have more what I call media literacy, if every time we walk by an advertisement, we look at that advertisement and say, how was that made? Who made that? Why did they make that? What kind of tools did they make to make that? What's missing from that message? I mean, these are critical thinking ideas that, we do when we teach a poem, analyzing or a short story, right? I mean, this is basic critical thinking, but we don't really have that critical thinking when it comes to, an advertisement. If we see an advertisement for Virginia Slims, and we say, who made this? Then, you know the answer, right? It's Virginia Slims, right? No, it's not. Virginia Slims doesn't exist. That's a brand name. The company that made that is called Philip Morris. And Philip Morris changed its name to Altria so that they would sound more altruistic several years ago. Oh, and by the way, the people that made that actually is a multi-million-dollar advertising company on Madison Avenue in New York City. And it involved around 200 people who were psychologists and people designing the font and people designing this and this and this. All of a sudden, a young person who has that information, right? And you guys are all smart people, and you probably didn't realize all that or think that immediately when I asked the question, who made this, right? You immediately said, oh, the Virginia Slims people, whoever that is. But once you know all that stuff, now I think you're less likely to just fall into it. You have actually, so, in health education stuff that I do, we actually dig through the tobacco industry's own documents as sort of like a secret treasure hunt, like pretending we've just discovered their stash of secret documents. And we find all these things like, this ad will help us get Black kids to smoke. All of a sudden, though, the African-American students in my, class are going to look at that and they're saying, I'm never smoking again, because they know how they're being controlled. They understand exactly what's going on. So this is the power of something like media literacy education. So what I've done with, my kids is more media literacy and less, you can't look at that. I tell my kids, like, you can look at just about anything, but let's look at it together so that I can help show why that's there and how that was created. And it doesn't have to be just about an advertiser. It can also be about an influencer. We can analyze, an influencer. We can analyze PewDiePie's page, right? And we can say, why does he do this? Why does he do this? How is he making money? Why is he making money? Who is here and why are they here? Why did he decide this font? Why did he decide that? And all of a sudden, I think that they have the tools to be less influenced in many different ways. So
briefly interrupt because I've hit 1 o'clock and just say thank you. I know we have some people who need to jump off pretty quickly. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming. And if you're willing, we'll just sit here and keep listening to you until we make it through the questions. But for those who have to go, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming. Please don't feel obligated. I will just close this up and just say that I believe that, so I've done this with my kids and it's been actually quite successful. And I mentioned program or be programmed. So for example, before I let my kids have devices, I said, you need to know how to program in HTML and Java. And so I let them use my computer to learn how to do that. And so now they know what you have to do to make a web page. And so now that they look at web pages, they can say, oh, I realize what he was doing here. I also made them go through sort of my own media literacy training where I felt like they really could ask those questions. How did they make this? Why did they make this? Who actually made it? What is missing? What's omitted from this message? So that hopefully it's almost like an inoculation. It's like a vaccine, so that when they experience those messages that they're of course going to be experiencing in their lives, this is why I'm not big on censorship, because, if I say, oh, you can't do that here in my house, then they're just going to see it in someone else's house. But if I show them how to analyze and evaluate what they see, then they're going to have that power that they can apply to any media message. And that sort of answers both of parts of the question. In other words, it's what I've done with my own kids, but it's also what I do in the programs that I try to study and that I try to purport are going to be valuable for, you know, teens in general. I think that that's the strategy we need to do. We need to teach them how to be, you know, excellent engagers, communicators themselves, to use these techniques. There's nothing evil about creating a YouTube channel. You know, I had my daughter create a YouTube channel on her passion guinea pigs because I thought it was such a great experience, you know, and she's done that. And, you know, now she knows the positive things and the pitfalls, et cetera, et cetera. You know, my son uses these techniques to, you know, to post about his music and that kind of thing. You know, there's nothing evil about these things. We should embrace them, but we should also realize when they are controlling us so that we get the empowerment and not whatever, you know, entity is trying to control us, especially if it's the tobacco industry.
I had a question while you were presenting your research. Are there certain social platforms that are more susceptible to this, which I'm guessing is the correlation between depression and use, or is it pretty equal across the board of Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the data are mixed. There are some studies that show that more visual platforms can be more concerning in some ways. And it kind of makes sense. Again, I mentioned before, just the brain stuff, that the visual cortex, the occipital lobe, is the fancy part of the brain that processes visual information. It's very, very connected to the emotional parts of the body. And so, you know, that kind of makes sense. On the other hand, it sort of depends on how and why you're using it also. So for example, you may be using a visual platform, but you're only connecting with this group of people and using it in this particular way. That might be more preferable than using a, you know, a more text-based platform like Twitter or like Reddit, but using it in some other way. So even though, you know, the type of platform and how visual it is important. You know, I didn't have time to tell you guys about all the different ways that you can use social media, but every single little choice, you know, so I'll give just one example. How many friends is the right number of friends? Well, you know, a lot of people think, well, more is better, right? You know, because you've got more, you know, well, it's been shown that it's actually fewer is better. Because when you know more people better, you are less likely to be misunderstood by them. You're less likely to get in some kind of a negative confrontation. You know, it's people who already know you well. That's another thing, is if you're only friends with people that you know on a face-to-face basis, you're in much better shape emotional health-wise than if, say, half your friends you've never actually met in person. And I know that that might seem a little bit weird to some of you, like, what? You're friends with lots of people you don't know in person? But most young people these days are friends with 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% of their friends are people they've never met before. But they're people that they meet online. And so, you know, oh, you like that band, I like that band. But if they haven't actually met in person, then maybe they haven't really formed that connection. And so maybe they have a more tenuous relationship that could easily go south and cause problems.
Okay, our last question is another college-related question. How has COVID impacted enrollment for the programs in health professions?
Yeah, you know, it's a great question. And knock on wood, our enrollment is stable. Our enrollment is better than last year. Our enrollment of minority students is also better than last year. So we're doing great. And I do, you know, I really, I credit everyone in the college. You know, I mean, I see Shannon's on the line, our communications person, Kate, the associate dean of the college. I mean, everybody's just really come together to make sure that we are, that we're sending the message that we're ready. We're open for business and we're going to be flexible with you. And we are going to cater to what you want, whether that's in person or whether that's to be safer from a remote environment, we're going to double down on how strong our remote programs are. And so, you know, so everything is actually quite good right now. Now, that being said, there's going to be a few really critical weeks coming up to the end. So are we going to potentially have melt? You know, yeah, we might have melt, but I'll tell you, it's much better than a lot of my colleagues at other universities. I mean, I'm in touch with people from other universities who are telling me that their university, their college, their department, you know, they have, you know, 20% decrease from last year, 15%, 25%, you know, because everybody's taking a gap year. You know, people are realizing, I believe, that they're going to have a great experience, whatever ends up happening. You know, even if we get sent home, they're still going to have a great experience. And guess what? Make your gap year a year with us, because we got great programs.
Well, excellent. I didn't see any more come through. Maybe also because it's 1:08 and we probably need to let you get back to deaning. But thank you so much for your insightful, enlightening presentation. On behalf of the entire Alumni Association, we appreciate you spending time with us today. On behalf of the board, I just want to thank all of our Alumni Association members who are here. We're so glad that you're staying connected with us and with one another throughout COVID-19. And with that, I will turn it back over to Mary Kate for any announcements from the Alumni House.
Right. I just want to echo Tori. Thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Dean Primack, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk with us. I think Tori and I said that we could listen to this research all day. It's something I'm super interested in. So thank you again for sharing with us and taking that time to just share what you know and your expertise. I know a lot of us were definitely interested in hearing more. So hopefully we'll get to when we're on campus all together soon.
That sounds great. And thanks again to you, Mary Kate, for all the organization. Tori, great to get to know you. Brandy, thanks for your leadership in this area. And to all the alumni, know that it's actually in our strategic plan that we're developing. It's not all signed, sealed, and delivered. That's why you haven't seen it. But it's actually in our strategic plan that we want better connections with our alumni. So we're going to be reaching out to you, but feel free at any time to reach out to us as well.
Oh, perfect. We love to hear that. Well, I'll let everyone get back to their day. Thank you again, Dean Primack, and thank you again, Tori, for joining us today.